Welcome to the Blender tutorial. We will learn here in the next few lessons how to use Blender, its interface, create objects, transform them, edit them, and have fun together. After a few more, I hope very useful lessons for you, we will come to animating objects and animations of editing object shapes. Towards the end, we will also learn the basics of Blender's movie editor, because Blender has a pretty good movie editor. Okay, so how? Shall we start learning Blender together? It is best to start your adventure with Blender from the website blender.org. You can download Blender here. I suggest downloading a portable file, one that you will not have to install on your computer. Of course, you are right. The alternative is to download the file to install. I will add that you can also download this file if you are a Windows user, for example, from the Windows Store. But you are probably wondering why portable? Mainly because Blender gets new versions every few months, and if you have Blender installed, you have to uninstall and reinstall it. When we uninstall one version and install the other version, there are problems with the operating system and cooperation with it. Therefore, in my opinion, it is reasonable to download the portable version of Blender. Once you've downloaded the Blender zip file, of course, you need to unzip it. I already have this file. I downloaded it earlier and unzipped it. I did it so as not to prolong this lesson. So I'll go directly into the Blender project directory. Inside the mentioned directory, you need to click on Blender exe to start Blender. If this is your first time running Blender, first of all, Windows may ask you if you want to download it from the Windows Store. The operating system may also tell you that your version of Blender has not been downloaded from the system store. And he is right. After all, you downloaded the file from blender.org. Then, if Windows doesn't want to open the file, you have to open it as an administrator the first time. And then there will be no problem. However, if you downloaded Blender from the Windows Store, then this file will be opened immediately. You should also remember that during the first playback, you will be able to make various settings in this program. We click General. Now we are inside the Blender interface. If you press scroll on the mouse now and start moving the mouse, you can see how Blender's 3D environments works. Yes, you are inside a 3D environment. But before we start working with the first object, let's first go to the top left in the File menu and then Edit. Let's click Preferences. And here it is worth setting yourself. First of all, the dim. It's up to you which of these dims you choose. I choose Minimal Dark, at least for this lesson. Of course, one or more dims. If you prefer bright dims, you can choose the one that suits you. If you want something with greenery, you can look for this type and dim and so on. You can also leave the default Blender dark dim or, as I said, set a completely different one. In any case, it's worth browsing through the dims and adjusting the selection to your liking. The second item of the described menu, which is worth looking at now, is system. Here you need to consider what processor you have in your computer and what graphics card you have. Then you need to set the tab with graphics cards according to the resources of your computer. This will allow you to optimize work in Blender. Also, when rendering movies, animations, and photos. To the topic, to the details related to cards in Blender, I think we will come back in the future. I think we could use a special episode on Blender settings, but since this is an introductory course, so for now that's all we need to do. Let's take a look at the possibilities offered by Blender. Best to look at the website. Here we have indicated the basic advantages, basic capabilities, and functionalities of Blender, including the rendering engine. It has several options. We'll talk about them in a few minutes. Blender, modeling, sculpting, special effects, and animation, which is one of the greatest advantages of Blender along with rigging. Setting up various types of bonds that allow the animator to move characters in Blender. Blender is also a 2D engine, so we can also draw 2D elements and make 2D animated movies. Finally, the last interesting element that we will learn about in one of the next episodes is Video Editor, a program for professional video edition. All the elements of the Blender program that I talked about are contained in the top menu. By the way, when we look at the menu interface, I will admit that it can be a bit scary, especially for people who are completely inexperienced in working with the 3D environment. First of all, because there are a lot different types of options here, and sometimes it's hard to understand them. Let's start from the beginning. In the upper left corner, we have a general menu. We have already been to it. We will come back to it. The most commonly used are firstly various types of settings, and secondly rendering photos, videos, and animations. Another element of the interface are the individual modules of the Blender program. We will usually work in the layout area, but as you can see, there are many more modules up here, including the ones we talked about earlier, being on the Blender website, video editing, 2D animation, modeling, and so on. Here we can navigate to all sorts of Blender modules. Let's go back to the layout. In the middle we have, as you can see, the 3D environment, the 3D world visible in Blender. To make it a bit easier to navigate through it, I suggest using the first keyboard shortcut of the Blender program. That's right, keyboard shortcuts. Yes, this is a powerful force and advantage that Blender offers us. Thanks to keyboard shortcuts, working with Blender is much easier and more pleasant. You just need to remember a few basic shortcuts. First shortcut, Shift key and A key. When standing over this part of the screen, you press Shift A, the Add menu will appear. From this menu, let's select Mesh and Plane. The latter will allow us to lay a kind of floor, thanks to which it will be easier to orientate ourselves in 3D space. Plane inserted into the 3D environment is at the height of the basic plane that connects us to 3 dimensions, X, Y, and Z. Notice that each of these dimensions is marked with a corresponding color. For my Blender theme, axis X axis is red, Y axis is green, and then we have purple or blue depending on the Blender theme version. The latter will point us to the Z axis. Do you want to see it? Press the G key on your keyboard and then Z. You will then see a vertical line. Yes, this is the Z axis. We can also move objects around it. But I don't want to move plane vertically. I just want plane to be stretched horizontally to make it our plane the so-called ground. To do this, press the S key on your keyboard and then try to move the mouse so that the plane object is stretched along the x-axis and along the y-axis. When you decide that it is large enough, click the left mouse button. Cool! We've got the floor done. Let me remind you that when you press the scroll wheel, you will be able to view our project in a 3D environment. Now, I suggest hovering over the cube, left-clicking on it, then clicking the G key on the keyboard, then the Z key. Now we can move the cube up above the plane level. So that our work is not in vain, let's save the project. So we enter the upper left corner menu File, Save As. Now let's save our project under a name. I suggest calling it simple Project 1. In this way, we created the first project in Blender in 3D space. To make the view of our work more attractive, let's add colors. Let's color the cube first. With the cube selected, go to the right to Material Properties, click Material Properties, then look for Base Color, where we click on the Wipe Stripe rectangle. We choose the color that suits us best from the color palette, and as you can see, nothing has changed. Surprise, but this is not an error. This is a completely correct operation of Blender, because type of view we are in is designed primarily to be able to watch the animation without overloading the computer's resources. And yet, the design would be an aggravating element. Therefore, in this version of the view, design elements such as colors, light, objects, shadows, etc. are not used in order to optimize the display, including animations. Let's move up to the right corner. As you can see here, we have 4 balls. The first one shows us the grid view. The second ball is solid mode. The third ball will show us the material preview, and here the color will already appear. The fourth ball remains the rendered display, that is the view of what our movie will probably look like in the final version. Let's go back to the third ball. This is to the Object Colors Edit view. Now let's click on Plane. Plane is selected. We can go back to Material Properties. As you can see, the word New and the plus sign appear here. You have to click on the above-mentioned inscription. Thus, we created a new material. I'll rename it Plane right away, so I know it's the material for the plane object I created. That is, it will be the color I gave my ground, or, if you prefer, the floor. Then I go back to base color. I choose a color, maybe darken it a bit, or maybe and already cool. The first Blender project is done. We can now click the shortcut Ctrl S on the keyboard to save the project. Another element that I would like to talk about from the interface is the right part of the screen, which is what you see here on the right side. First, we have a stage. On the stage, as you can see the camera, then we will cube and light. Below the light object is the plane object, which is the floor we created earlier. Each subsequent element that you add, each subsequent object that you add to the scene will appear in the collection of the given scene. Of course, there can be more such collections. There may also be more scenes, but for now, at least in the Blender Basic video series, we'll only be working on one scene and one collection. Below we have a powerful editing panel which consists of several useful elements. Sometimes additional icons appear here. For example, when we add text, a text icon will appear. But for now, we will only be using material properties in this video. We've actually already used material properties. In this video, I would also like to tell you a bit about the output properties, i.e. about the fact that we can set the resolution to which we want to export our movie. Next, we can also set the project directory to which we want to export the movie or photo. By default in Blender, this is a TMP file that Blender creates on your computer's main drive. Into this directory, TMP, Blender uploads rendered project elements. Blender also created such a directory on my hard disk. Then we will convert this catalog into the catalog of our training. Even lower, we can indicate in which formats we will like to export or what we would like to export. These are export rendered settings. So, as you can see, we can export one or more frames first. But let's go a little lower for a moment. Take a look at the timeline showing the frames of the movie. On the right side, there is a tool where we can enter how many frames we want to export from our movie. Next, we can enter the format, whether it should be, for example, in PNG or RV or FFmpeg or in another format. Let this knowledge suffice for now. Let us talk about the next settings in the next episodes of the video. When it comes to the interface, we have only more interesting element, i.e. the frame view. Starting from 1 or 250. This is such an element of Blender that allows the user to edit animations, more specifically, to create and edit animations to the timeline. I assume that around the 4th, 5th, or maybe 6th episode of this series, we will learn how to animate and then we will discuss this timeline editor in more detail. Now, when it comes to the basics of Blender environment, I think the subject has already been exhausted in its basics. I invite you to the next lessons about the Blender program. Cheers and see you in the next episodes. And subscribe my channel, please, and thank you. Goodbye.